Good morning to all. It's good to see so many people in the room and so many familiar faces as well. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Fiona, and for such inspiring works, Mike. I'm Marina Romanello. I'm the Executive Director for the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change, and I was tasked with presenting you the science of climate change and health, which would take me about 3 days, if not more, but I'm going to try to do all of that in 15 minutes, so bear with me. So the Lancet Countdown, is this working actually? There we go. The Lancet Countdown and the work that I'm going to present to you is a big collaborative research collaboration. It's an academic collaboration that is funded by the Wellcome Trust and based off UCL, but bringing together 57 contributing organizations for our global work and about 100 for our regional work as well. And we bring together experts from a broad range of fields. You just heard about the importance of physiologists being engaging when we talk about climate change in every conversation. We bring together economists, political scientists, engineers, medics, public health specialists, and professionals from all walks of life to tackle the links between climate change and health through the system-wide multidisciplinary approach that it needs. Can I do this, or do you need to do it? Yes, there we go. So I'm going to share with you some of the results from our recent reports. I'm going to share with you a lot of data. But what's important to remember always is that these numbers are just numbers. Behind each of these numbers, there's people that are being affected by climate change and opportunities that we could deliver to protect and promote people's lives. So our latest report was perhaps the most concerning one. We've been doing annual iterative reports with indicators tracking the links between climate change and health for 8 years now. This will be our 9th year that we will publish just ahead of COP30. But the latest year of data was the most concerning because we started to pick up these very concerning trends and very clear trends towards increased health risks and health impacts of climate change across 10 of the 15 indicators in which we're monitoring the growing health risks and impacts of climate change. We're seeing that the latest year of data has marked a record high level, which means that we're breaking records of impacts, records of hazards, records of exposures that we as human beings, as modern human beings, have never been exposed to before. So we're already into uncharted territory. Some of the data that I'm going to share a few of these indicators. There are way too many to share all of them with you. But some of the highlights of our indicators have to do with the growing impacts that we're seeing across the key determinants of health. So firstly, obviously, heat-related mortality. The most obvious link between climate change and health is how the record high temperatures and heat exposure is already affecting our health, already affecting our survival. We've seen an estimated 167% increase in global heat-related mortality since the 1990s. Again, record high level in the latest year of data, that was 2023, a record hot year. And we know that this is mostly driven by the high temperatures. Obviously, we're looking at the very vulnerable over 65 population, the elderly, that are particularly vulnerable to heat exposure. But we know that it's not being driven only by population change, which would have only accounted for about 65% increase. This is the result of the growth in temperatures. And obviously, when we look at heat-related mortality, that is just the tip of the iceberg. That is the most extreme outcome of the impacts of heat on our health. But underneath this tip, there's a huge, big iceberg that has to do with the impacts of heat on morbidity. We have data that shows that heat is increasingly undermining sleep quality, affecting mental health, deteriorating, as you just heard from Liz Robinson, that is a contributor to our work, also deteriorating labor capacity, labor productivity, and putting workers at risk. Aside from heat-related mortality, we're seeing changes in precipitation patterns, changes in humidity, and what this is resulting in is a change in the geographical distribution of deadly infectious diseases that we have long been working in the global health sphere to keep under control. So we're seeing that dengue, the most rapidly spreading infectious disease transmitted by mosquitoes in the world, is increasing its geographical distribution because of the changes in temperature, humidity, and precipitation patterns. And we see that the environmental suitability determined by the climate for dengue transmission has increased for Aedes albopictus, that is the main vector that transmits dengue in Europe, for example, by 46.3%. We see other things like, for example, waterborne diseases. In this case, we're looking at Vibrio pathogens that generate flesh-eating disease, that generate gastrointestinal infections, also expanding their geographical distribution to areas where people were not used to seeing these pathogens before. So we don't have the protective infrastructure in these places, and people don't have the habits of knowing how to protect themselves from the exposure to these deadly pathogens. And another of the indicators, actually, who's also, I see in the audience, so you can then talk to Liz Robinson and Shura Dasgupta that are there, is the impact that the increased frequency of heatwave and drought events are having on people's food insecurity. And this is an analysis that is being done through self-reported data, from data of people saying that they could not access the food that they needed to meet their nutritional needs. It's based on people's experience. And we're seeing that the increased frequency of heat waves and drought months in 2022 as compared to our baseline years has already resulted in 151 million more people experiencing moderate or worse food insecurity. Obviously, this increases the risk of malnutrition, which already is ramping high, particularly in the most vulnerable parts of the world. So these are the impacts that we're seeing up until now. I'm showing them to you in isolation, but it's worth keeping in mind that these are not isolated impacts. These impacts are occurring all at once. People are being exposed to extreme weather events that generate catastrophes. People are being exposed to increased incidence of outbreaks of climate-sensitive diseases, food insecurity, water insecurity, and all of that is often happening at once. So there's a multiplier effect that we cannot capture through and isolated indicators that is the system-wide impact of climate change on the fundamental determinants of health. Adaptation has been really slow. We have not been able to protect ourselves efficiently enough from the growing hazards of climate change. That's why we're seeing death that should be avoidable at the current 1.3, almost 5 levels of heating. But the thing is that this is just the start of what we know is already committed increase in global mean temperatures. We know that there's already a heating that is underway and that even if we were to stop completely emissions today, which we won't, will not be stoppable. So what we did is to model what would health look like in a scenario in which the world manages to keep global mean temperatures below that 2-degree target set in the Paris Agreement by the end of the century. And what we see is that already by mid-century, we see very sharp increases in the risks across all of the indicators that we monitor. You see there the numbers, I won't go through them one by one, but this means that we're heading into a very dangerous future. If adaptation has already been so delayed and so inefficient, we definitely need to increase our efforts to adapt, but we very urgently need to ensure that temperatures do not cross that threshold. And how are we doing in that regard? We know that the main single contributor to greenhouse gas emissions is the energy sector because of the burning of fossil fuels. We already heard we need to keep fossil fuels on the ground, and that is a matter quite literally of life or death. But we're seeing that global greenhouse gas emissions from our energy sector keep rising, far from falling. We've reached record high levels in the 2022, and we have data also for 2023 that shows that was also a record high year. So we keep on increasing our emissions that keep on accumulating in the atmosphere. And when we look at some of the more positive signs, what we're doing about renewable energy use, we are increasing the use of renewable energy at much faster pace than we were expecting in the past. So that is really encouraging, but it's not managing to displace fossil fuels. And one thing that I wanted to draw your attention on is the global inequities related to the use of renewable energies. And this divide that low middle-income countries or low human development index countries need to focus exclusively on adaptation has led to those low human development index countries lagging behind in the adoption of clean renewable energy. Now, why does that matter? They're being left behind in an economic transition, but also in the transition to healthy energy sources. The most vulnerable parts of the world, low human development index countries, keep on being massively reliant on very dirty fuels and technologies to meet their energy needs. This means that people inside their homes are either using fossil fuels or sometimes biomass, solid fuels that lead to very high levels of air pollution because they don't have access to clean renewable energy that can be afforded off-grid and is now much more cost-effective than fossil fuels, particularly in remote parts of the world. So you can see there what this looks like in terms of people's exposure to household air pollution. We estimate about 2.3 million deaths in the 65 countries that are mostly reliant on solid biomass and fossil fuels to meet their household energy needs. And as you can see there, big divides between urban and rural populations, so also an intranational inequity generated there. And these are 2.3 million deaths absolutely avoidable by transitioning to clean, renewable energy that, again, is today more affordable, could be made massively available. It's not just household air pollution, though, and it's not just in low human development index countries. The persistent burning of fossil fuels, the persistent burning of biomass, and unhealthy and often greenhouse gas emitting industrial practices are also leading to very high levels of outdoor air pollution. And we know that more than 90% of the world's children still breathe air that exceeds the WHO's threshold for safe air quality. As you can see there, anthropogenic PM2.5, particulate matter, air pollution, the most harmful form of particulate air pollution, we estimate has already contributed to about 2.4 million deaths, of which 2.1 come from fossil fuel burning alone. And almost 1 million come from the persistent burning of coal. That is the dirtiest form of fossil fuels, is still heavily polluting, and is very expensive as compared to other forms of energy. So those are millions of deaths that could be avoided every year through the transition and the phase out of fossil fuels. That is one of the missed opportunities of our current inaction. The other missed opportunity has to do with what we're doing with respect to our deforestation. Our forests are the world's lungs. We all know this. They absorb greenhouse gases. Our carbon cycle cannot continue without them. And the bad news is that although we have this very important natural resource and natural carbon sink, we keep on deforesting it. We keep on tackling it. While we talk about fantasy technologies of carbon capture and storage, we keep on deforesting the most efficient form of carbon capture and storage, that is our forests. As you can see in the line graph that I'm showing you there on the left, deforestation rate has fallen, but it's still really high. And the cumulative deforestation has led to about 500 million hectares being lost of global tree cover since 2001. You can see what are the main sources of that tree cover loss. Forestry, the main source, but the second one is shifting agriculture. And let's look at agriculture for a moment. Agricultural emissions contribute to about, or the food sector in general, rather, contributes to around 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions. From the agricultural sector, the biggest single contributor is the rearing of livestock. So ruminant rearing contributes to about 56% of that greenhouse gas emissions for the production of meat and dairy. And the interesting thing is that overconsumption of meat and dairy is also responsible for a very high burden of disease. That is what you can see there in the graphic on the right. We estimate that by transitioning to healthy, planetary compatible diets, we could save about 11.2 million lives every year through healthier diets that are also more environmentally friendly. And excess red meat intake disproportionately in industrialized, very high human development index countries is not only the main contributor to agricultural greenhouse gas emissions and deforestation, but also to 14 to 16 deaths per 100,000, a really high rate of mortality. So again, another of the opportunities that we do have to tackle climate change whilst delivering healthier lives, healthier diets, more well-being. And this requires both individual action, but also political will and a permissive political infrastructure. So I've shown you already some of the numbers that show what the opportunity is. But I did want to say tackling climate change can deliver these transformative health benefits that we've seen. It does require us to transition away from fossil fuels. One thing that I have not shown, but is very important, is that we keep on subsidizing fossil fuels for almost 1 trillion per year as fossil fuel companies make record profits. It makes no economic sense. So whether we achieve this or not is not a technical issue. We know how to transition. It's not a financial challenge. Almost 1 trillion every year for fossil fuel subsidies as fossil fuel companies make record high profits and the world is still energy poor makes no sense. So whether we achieve this is entirely a matter of public and political will. And I'm so delighted to see that that is the focus of this summit. And I thank so much the Physiological Society for bringing us together in this important moment. I also wanted to thank the Wellcome Trust UCL for hosting us, and obviously the Lancet for everything they do for us. Thank you very much.